The training camp footage coming out of Cleveland today is making some very important people in that building seriously uncomfortable. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Because what happened during day 12 of Brown's camp wasn't just another practice. It was the moment when everybody stopped pretending this quarterback competition was actually competitive anymore. Here's what went down. Deshaun Watson got every single first-team rep. Everyone. That's the setup that's supposed to tell you who the coaching staff believes in right now. But then Shedeur Sanders took the field with the second team, and something shifted. Something that nobody in that organization wanted to see happen quite this early. And by the end of today, 3 separate national media voices independently arrived at the exact same conclusion within hours of each other. That this thing is already decided. The only question now is whether the front office is brave enough to admit it out loud. This isn't just about 2 quarterbacks going through practice reps. This is about one of the biggest quarterback bets any NFL organization has made in recent memory. And when a rookie who fell to day 3 starts making that investment look questionable, it creates a tension inside an organization that doesn't get resolved quietly. It gets resolved on the field. Before we get into what actually happened on that field, you need to understand the backdrop here, because this story is so much bigger than just quarterback reps and practice statistics. This is about one of the most controversial quarterback investments any NFL organization has made in recent football history. We're talking about Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns. We're talking about a contract that fundamentally restructured an entire franchise's salary cap architecture. We're talking about an organization that bet the farm on one guy and now has to reconcile what they're seeing on the field with what they're committed to on paper. Every interception that Deshaun Watson throws isn't just a number that goes on a stat sheet somewhere. Every incompletion isn't just a missed throw. Every turnover is a referendum on whether that massive investment was actually worth it. When you're the Cleveland Browns front office and you've made that kind of commitment to a quarterback, every practice rep becomes loaded with significance. Every day of training camp becomes a test. And when that test is being failed in front of an entire organization, it creates a tension that builds and builds until something has to give. That's the environment we're working with right now in Cleveland. That's the backdrop that makes what happened on day 12 so significant. Because this isn't just some quarterback competition that's playing out the way these things normally play out. This is a situation where organizational investment is directly clashing with on-field performance in real time. And organizations don't like that. They don't know how to handle it. They typically want to delay these conversations as long as humanly possible. But here's the thing about trying to delay uncomfortable conversations in sports. The tape has a way of making that impossible. The evidence accumulates. The pattern emerges. And at a certain point, nobody can pretend anymore that the situation is what the front office wishes it was rather than what it actually is. Now, to understand why this matters so much right now, you've got to understand who Shedeur Sanders is and where he came from in the draft process. This isn't a first-round pick who was hyped from day 1. This isn't a guy who was supposed to be the future of this franchise. Shedeur Sanders fell to day 3. He was a third-day selection in an NFL draft where evaluators and scouts and front offices had all made their decisions about him already. He wasn't the guy. He was supposed to be a project, a development piece, a guy you grab late and see if anything clicks down the line. And that's exactly what makes what's happening right now so seismic for the organization. Because if Shedeur Sanders is outplaying Deshaun Watson, if a day 3 draft pick is beating out a guy making franchise quarterback money, that forces a conversation that nobody in that building wants to have. That forces questions about organizational decision-making at the highest levels. That forces everyone to confront the reality that sometimes the investment doesn't pan out the way you hoped. The irony here is almost painful when you think about it. The Browns brought in Deshaun Watson because they wanted to get out of the quarterback carousel. They wanted stability. They wanted to break the cycle of rotating through different guys year after year, and they were willing to commit massive resources to make that happen. They restructured their entire salary cap. They gave him an astronomical contract. They put all their chips on this one guy. But sometimes, when you're trying to escape a cycle, you create a new one. Sometimes, when you're desperate for a solution, you end up with a problem that's worse than the original one. And that's potentially what's unfolding in Cleveland right now. They went from having uncertainty at quarterback to having certainty that their guy isn't performing. That's almost worse in some ways because now they're stuck. They're committed. They can't just move on. They have to watch this play out. What makes day 12 of training camp so significant is that this pattern is becoming undeniable. This isn't a one-off bad practice. This isn't a guy having a rough day. This is 12 days of consistent evidence that one quarterback is taking care of the football and playing efficient football while the other one is turning it over at an alarming rate. That's not randomness. That's not variance. That's information. And the people who cover this team, the people who watch every snap, the media members who have earned their credibility by being honest about what they're seeing, they're starting to come to the same conclusion. Not at different times. Not gradually over the season, but all within the same day. All independently, all saying the same thing. That's when you know something significant has shifted in how people are perceiving the situation. The Browns organization is at a crossroads right now. They can continue to play this out the way they've been playing it out, continuing to give Watson the first-team reps, continuing to call this an open competition, continuing to hope that something changes. Or they can confront the reality that what they're seeing on the field is telling them something important about their future. They can acknowledge that performance is starting to override contract status. They can make a decision based on what's actually happening rather than what they wish was happening. That's the real story here. That's what makes this moment matter so much for the franchise going forward. Because every choice an organization makes sends a message to the locker room about what actually gets rewarded and what actually matters. And the choice Cleveland makes in the next few days is going to define their organizational identity for years to come. Let's break down what the field actually said today, because the numbers tell a story that's impossible to ignore once you really sit down and look at them. This is day 12 of training camp. This is the point in the offseason where guys are supposed to be hitting their stride. This is when all the conditioning work starts paying dividends. This is when the plays that have been installed start becoming automatic. This is when you see who's ready and who isn't. Shedeur Sanders came out running with the backup offense. That's the reality of where he sits in the pecking order on paper. That's how the coaching staff has officially organized the depth chart. He's the number 2 guy. He's supposed to be getting limited reps. He's supposed to be developing. He's supposed to be learning the system. He's not supposed to be the headline of the day. But here's where this story takes an interesting turn. Shedeur showed up for practice with a blister wrapped around his throwing hand. His throwing hand, the one that matters for literally everything he does on the football field. This isn't some injury to his ankle or his shoulder where he might still be able to play through it reasonably well. This is an injury to the exact hand he uses to release the football. This is something that could legitimately affect every single throw he attempts. Most quarterbacks would probably be mentally already making excuses before they even stepped on the field. Most guys would be thinking about that blister and how it might affect their throws. But Shedeur went out and turned in one of the cleanest practices any quarterback has run all day. 17 completions out of 25 attempts. Perfect decision-making. Quick release. The ball coming out clean despite the injury. But here's the part that matters more than any highlight throw ever could. 0 interceptions. Completely clean. Not a single mistake. Not one. And he did all of that while dealing with pain in his throwing hand. While managing a blister that could have given him an out, a reason to maybe not perform at his best, a built-in excuse if things went wrong. That's the kind of performance that tells you something about a person. That tells you about their mental toughness. That tells you about their commitment. That tells you about the kind of player they're going to be when the lights come on and real games are being played. Because in the NFL, you're always going to have something bothering you. You're always going to have some kind of minor injury or discomfort that you have to push through. The guys who win are the ones who don't let that become an excuse. Meanwhile, on the other side of the field, Deshaun Watson was out there with the ones, the premium reps, the first-team offense, the best protection, the best receivers getting the most snaps, the entire setup designed to put him in a position to succeed. And over the course of the day, he threw his 9th interception in 12 days. 9th. Stop and think about that number for a second. In a normal NFL regular season, 9 interceptions over 12 days would get a backup quarterback cut. It would get a starter benched. It would spark conversations about whether you even want that guy on your roster. But Watson isn't a backup. Watson isn't a guy anyone is thinking about cutting. Watson is the investment. Watson is the guy they restructured the entire salary cap around. So instead of cut or benched, he stays in the game. He keeps getting reps. He keeps getting chances. And he keeps turning the football over. And it didn't stop with just interceptions either. Later in that same practice, Watson got strip-sacked by the same defender who'd been giving him problems all day. So now we're not just talking about accuracy issues or decision-making issues. We're talking about protection breakdowns. We're talking about the ability to feel pressure and get off the spot. We're talking about pocket presence being questioned. The whole package is starting to look uncomfortable. When you line up the stat sheet side by side, it becomes even clearer what we're dealing with here. Watson, 20 completions out of 29 attempts, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But that 1 interception is his 9th in 12 days, plus the batted pass we talked about, plus the strip sack. That's not a stat line you want to see from your starting quarterback running with your best offensive weapons. Meanwhile, the third quarterback on the depth chart, Dillon Gabriel, went 5 for 11 with his own touchdown and interception. So now you've got a 3-tier comparison that becomes really interesting from an analytical standpoint, because Watson isn't just in a battle with Shedeur anymore. He's not just being outplayed by the guy behind him. He's struggling relative to the entire quarterback room. He's the only guy in that group who's had a genuinely concerning day. The visual evidence matters too, not just the stats, but the eye test. When you watch Shedeur throwing, there's rhythm to it. There's timing. There's a sense of comfort in the pocket even though he's running with second-team receivers and second-team protection. He's moving with a purpose. He's making decisions quickly. He's not holding the ball too long. He's not forcing things into coverage. He's playing quarterback the way it's supposed to be played at a high level. When you watch Watson, there's hesitation. There's a guy who seems to be overthinking things. There's a pocket presence that looks fragile. There's decision-making that's causing turnovers. That's not just a bad day. That's a pattern of concerning play emerging in real time. And the most stunning part of all of this, Shedeur did it with a blister on his throwing hand. Watson did it with all the advantages and still couldn't execute at a baseline competent level. That contrast is what's making people uncomfortable in Cleveland right now. Here's where this story got really interesting, because it wasn't just what happened on the field that shifted the narrative today. It was what the people watching from the outside started saying about what they saw. Because the media reaction to Day 12 was genuinely different from what we've been hearing throughout this competition. And that matters more than people probably realize. When professional analysts and beat writers start singing the same song at the same time, that's when you know something significant has shifted in how people are perceiving the situation. 3 separate voices came out of this day with takes that surprised a lot of people. These aren't random internet personalities. These aren't guys on social media throwing out hot takes for engagement. These are national analysts. These are Cleveland area media members who cover this team day in and day out. These are people who have earned their credibility by being honest about football and what they see on film. And they all threw caution aside today. They all decided to be direct about what they saw. One analyst basically said something that cut right to the heart of the matter. He said the head coach cannot look everybody in that locker room in the eye and keep starting somebody else if the players themselves can see that Shedeur has outplayed and outcompeted Deshaun Watson. If the team sees him as the guy, then the coach has to give him the job. No more waiting. No more pretending. No more splitting reps and calling it competitive. That's not neutral analysis. That's not someone hedging their bets and keeping all options open. That's an analyst saying this has gone too far to keep pretending that we don't know who the better quarterback is. Think about what that means in context. Think about how significant it is for a professional analyst to say that a head coach cannot defend keeping a guy as a starter. That's a pretty strong statement. That's saying that at a certain point, organizational credibility is on the line. That's saying that people in that locker room are watching what's happening and drawing their own conclusions. That's saying that you can't just manage this by process and reps and hoping things change. You have to confront the reality. A second voice went even further than that, which is remarkable considering what the first analyst already said. This guy called Watson a diminished player at this stage of the competition. Diminished? That's not a word you use lightly about a quarterback making franchise money. Diminished means he's not the same guy. Diminished means something is wrong. Diminished means the level of play has deteriorated significantly from what people expected. And then this analyst said it would be a straight-up waste of everybody's time to hand Watson any more meaningful snaps. That's not analysis. That's frustration. That's someone who's watched enough to know where this is heading and doesn't understand why the coaching staff is still playing out a competition that looks decided. And then a third analyst came on and basically threw his hands up. He said he's exhausted even discussing Watson as part of this conversation anymore. Because at this point, it's Shedeur. It's Shedeur. It's Shedeur. He repeated the name like he was exhausted with having to explain it over and over again. He flat out questioned whether anyone in that building actually still believes Watson is the future of the franchise. And then he said something that hits at the heart of what's happening in Cleveland. He said the fans and everybody watching are not going to accept Watson as the starter at this point. That's the real concern for an organization. That's what keeps front offices up at night. When the fan base stops believing, when the outside world stops believing, when the narrative has shifted so far that you can't control it anymore. Now, the remarkable thing about all three of these reactions is that they didn't coordinate. They didn't talk to each other before going on air. They didn't have some planned, coordinated take. These are independent voices. These are people analyzing the same film, watching the same practice, seeing the same stat lines, and arriving at virtually identical conclusions. That's not coincidence. That's not media pylon. That's consensus. That's the kind of consensus that you only get when the evidence is overwhelming. And when the media stops treating something like an open competition and starts talking about it like the outcome is already decided, that usually means the tape has made up the minds of the analysts before anybody in the front office wants to admit it. The film doesn't lie. The numbers don't lie. And when you've got multiple professional voices saying the same thing, that's usually a sign that something fundamental has shifted in how this situation is being perceived. What's really fascinating here is the speed at which this shift happened. We're not talking about a gradual narrative change over several weeks. We're not talking about people slowly coming around to a conclusion. We're talking about day 12, when suddenly 3 separate voices all decided to be direct about what they're seeing. That suggests that day 12 was different. That suggests that Watson's 9th interception in 12 days crossed some kind of threshold. That suggests that the evidence became too overwhelming to keep presenting this as some kind of genuine open competition. The emotional tenor of these reactions also matters. The first analyst was direct and businesslike. The second was clearly frustrated. The third was exhausted. That's not neutral analysis. That's people who have watched enough to know where this is heading and they're tired of having to explain it. That's people whose patience has worn thin with the process. And that frustration typically reflects what's happening inside locker rooms and inside front offices. People are tired of the pretense. People want a decision made. People want to know who the starting quarterback is going to be. This is what happens when performance becomes undeniable. This is what happens when the tape speaks so clearly that nobody can pretend anymore. Now, what makes this even more interesting is what happened when Shedeur Sanders himself sat down for an interview today. Because if the field showed one version of this guy, if the stat sheet told one story, then his words revealed another dimension that might be even more important for the future. Because football is played with physical talent, but it's one with mental strength and psychological resilience. It's one with the ability to stay locked in when everything around you is chaotic. It's one with discipline and focus, and an understanding of what really matters. When Shedeur was asked about his mindset coming into this camp, he said something that caught a lot of people's attention because it was so simple and so direct. He said at this point in his life, all that matters is ball and getting better every day. Anything that isn't helping the team win, anything that's not moving them forward, he doesn't put energy into it anymore. That's not complicated. That's not some philosophical statement about life and meaning. That's laser focus. That's a guy who's distilled everything down to its essence and committed fully to what matters. And then he went into specifics about how he's actually living his life to support that mission. He talked about time blocking every single hour. He talked about running a strict sleep schedule. He talked about a strict communication schedule. He described it as real sacrifices he's made specifically for what he wants to bring to this team and this community. This isn't a guy who's just showing up to practice and coasting. This is a guy who's optimizing every single hour of his day with intention. This is someone who understands that at the professional level, the details matter. The recovery matters. The preparation matters. The mental work matters just as much as the physical work. When you start hearing from a quarterback about time management and sleep schedules and communication protocols, that tells you something about how seriously he's taking this opportunity. That tells you he's not thinking about draft position. He's not thinking about rookie contracts. He's not thinking about proving people wrong or fighting for respect. He's locked in on one thing and one thing only: winning. And that focus shows up on the field. It shows up in decision-making. It shows up in consistency. It shows up in the ability to execute even when dealing with things like a blister on your throwing hand. But here's where the interview got really revealing, because when he was asked how he brings a locker room together while also playing quarterback at a high level, his answer was almost annoyingly simple. Just be yourself. Don't force anything. People know what's genuine, and that's what actually builds trust in a room. Now, you could write that off as a cliché. You could say that's the kind of thing young guys always say. But think about what that actually means in practice. That means he's not trying to be someone he's not. That means he's not putting on some kind of persona to impress people. That means he trusts that his authenticity is enough. And that's a maturity level that not every young quarterback possesses. Then he said something else that matters more than people probably realize. He said the quarterback room specifically has grown the most out of anywhere on the roster this year. No petty internal battles. No beef. No one trying to throw anyone else under the bus or make themselves look better by making others look worse. Because in his words, it's not up to the quarterbacks to decide who plays. That's on the coaching staff. Whoever puts their best foot forward gets the job. Everybody's goal in that building is aligned. Now think about how remarkable that is. You've got a situation where a backup is clearly outplaying the starter. You've got a situation where there's millions of dollars at stake. You've got a situation where egos could easily get involved. And instead of drama, what we're hearing is that the quarterback room is functioning at the highest level. That's not something you can coach. That's something you either have or you don't. And Shedeur clearly has it. That's an indicator that he's the kind of leader that can hold a locker room together. That's an indicator that he's got the maturity to handle success and the humility to handle adversity. That's the kind of stuff that separates really good quarterbacks from great ones. Now, here's where it gets really interesting from a media standpoint. The interviewer tried to get cute. Tried to sneak in a leading question, implying that Deshaun Watson has gotten better since camp started. Basically fishing for Shedeur to either agree or disagree in a way that creates a headline. You know how these interviews work. Reporters sometimes try to put words in athletes' mouths or get them to say something that can be taken out of context and turned into a story. But Shedeur didn't flinch. He called it out in real time. He basically said nice try, but he wasn't about to get trapped into saying Watson is better than him or worse than him. He stayed completely in control of his own narrative. He didn't take the bait. He didn't create a headline for the interviewer. He just moved on. That's not just poise. That's a guy who completely understands the media landscape and what's being asked of him in these situations. That's a guy who's smart enough to understand that saying certain things creates narratives that follow you. That's a franchise quarterback mentality right there. That's the kind of maturity that separates guys who can handle the pressure of being a starting quarterback in the NFL from guys who can't. When you put it all together, the focus, the discipline, the authenticity, the maturity to handle media situations, you start to understand why the people in that building are rallying around this guy. It's not just because he's throwing accurate passes. It's because he's showing up as a complete person. He's showing up with the right mindset. He's showing up with leadership qualities that matter in a locker room. So now we've got on-field performance that speaks for itself. We've got media consensus shifting in real time. We've got a guy showing up mentally and emotionally exactly the way a starting quarterback needs to show up. But there's another layer to this story that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's the supporting cast. Because quarterbacks don't play in a vacuum. Quarterbacks operate within an ecosystem. They're dependent on play callers. They're dependent on offensive lines. They're dependent on receivers who can get open and catch the football. Coach Prime, Shedeur's father, said something months ago that I keep coming back to because it's such a clear framework for understanding what a quarterback actually needs to succeed. He said a quarterback needs 3 things to succeed at a high level: a good play caller, a good offensive line, real playmakers at receiver. That's it. That's the framework. That's what separates situations where a quarterback can succeed from situations where it doesn't matter how good the quarterback is. The system is going to hold him back. So let's evaluate Shedeur's current situation against Coach Prime's 3 requirements, because this actually matters more than people realize. First, the play caller. Shedeur's got Todd Monken calling plays. Now, if you've been paying attention to football over the last several years, you know that Monken is one of the better offensive minds in the game right now. He's proven it at multiple stops. He's proven it in different systems. He's got a track record of getting the most out of his quarterbacks. He's not a guy who's going to hold a young quarterback back. He's not a guy who's going to call a conservative game plan that doesn't let his playmakers operate. Monken is going to put Shedeur in positions where he can succeed. That box is checked. Second, the offensive line. Now, this is interesting because Watson came into this situation with an offensive line that had its problems. That was one of the narratives early in the season about why Watson was struggling. But the offensive line has been rebuilt from a year ago, so Shedeur is not working with the same unit that Watson was initially frustrated with. He's working with a reconstructed line that's had time to gel and improve. That box is checked. Third, the playmakers at receiver. This is where it gets really interesting because Shedeur's receiver room is actually pretty solid. Denzel Boston is flashing real chemistry with Shedeur based on what we saw today. Not just one catch, but multiple targets where Boston and Shedeur are operating on the same wavelength. That's the beginning of a rhythm and timing relationship that's going to matter throughout the season. Isaiah Bond's speed becomes relevant in an offense that's actually operating efficiently instead of turning the ball over every 5 minutes and killing its own drives. Harold Landry Jr. at tight end has that security blanket potential that young quarterbacks need when they're still building full command of the playbook. Quinson Judkins out of the backfield gives Shedeur another receiving option that he's been hitting cleanly over the middle, which is an important part of his game. So when you look at Shedeur's situation against Coach Prime's 3-part framework, every single box is checked. The play caller is one of the best in the business. Still out there posting clean, mistake-free football with a blister on his throwing hand. What else does this kid have to do to prove he's ready? This is actually the part where Shedeur's situation becomes most different from Watson's, because Watson came into a situation where at least one of those 3 boxes, the offensive line, was legitimately problematic. That gave Watson's supporters a narrative to work with. That gave them a reason to say, well, the supporting cast isn't ideal, so let's give him more time. But Shedeur doesn't have that excuse available to him. He's got good play calling. He's got a solid offensive line. He's got real weapons to throw to, and he's still performing at a high level. That removes a lot of the variables. That makes the comparison between him and Watson a lot more straightforward. The chemistry factor matters here too, because building timing and rhythm with receivers is something that takes time. You don't just show up and immediately have perfect communication with the guys you're throwing to. But Shedeur is already showing those building blocks. He's already showing the kind of quick decision-making and intermediate throws that suggest he's got a comfort level with what he's doing. That comfort level, combined with a solid supporting cast, creates a foundation that could lead to real success. The versatility of the receiver room also matters, because Shedeur's shown the ability to work inside with crossing routes and intermediate stuff. He's shown the ability to hit guys over the middle. He's shown the ability to find tight ends in the passing game. He's shown the ability to distribute to running backs out of the backfield. That versatility combined with a play caller like Todd Monken means the offense has a lot of different ways to attack defenses. That's not a system that's limited. That's a system with multiple avenues for success. And here's the thing that really matters when you step back and look at the big that operate in the space where he likes to throw. He has a play caller that understands his rhythm-based game. He has an offensive line that's solid enough to give him time to let plays develop. That's not something every young quarterback gets. That's actually pretty ideal for a third-day draft pick trying to prove he belongs in this league. Now, here's where this story gets complicated, because there's a massive elephant in the room that nobody in Cleveland can ignore. And it's the reason why this decision, even though it seems obvious based on what we've seen on the field, is going to be so difficult for the organization to actually make. Deshaun Watson is not some veteran competing for a job on a prove-it deal. This is not a guy on a one-year contract where both sides agreed to let performance decide things. This is a quarterback the Browns restructured their entire salary cap around. We're talking about one of the most talked-about contracts in modern NFL history. The money is astronomical. The commitment is organization-defining. The implications of getting this wrong are franchise-altering. When you hear about Deshaun Watson's contract, the numbers are genuinely shocking. We're talking about a guy making franchise quarterback money when a lot of people think he shouldn't be starting. We're talking about money that has created constraint for the organization in other areas. We're talking about a contract that ties the team's hands in terms of what they can do in free agency or the draft. This isn't just about whether Watson plays well. This is about whether an entire organization's strategic decision was correct. And now a rookie who fell to day 3 of the draft is outplaying him in every measurable way during training camp. And that creates a problem. Not a football problem, that's simple, Shedeur is playing better, but an organizational problem, a front office problem, a pride problem. Because if you're the Browns front office, you've got to explain to ownership, to the fan base, to the media, to the entire organization why a guy making that kind of money is getting outplayed by a rookie who cost a fraction of that. That's an uncomfortable conversation to have. That's a conversation that involves admitting you made a mistake. That's a conversation that involves addressing the fact that a massive investment isn't panning out the way you hoped. And organizations tend to delay uncomfortable conversations as long as they possibly can. They hope the situation resolves itself. They hope the veteran bounces back. They hope something changes that makes the decision easier. They hope that maybe in the regular season, things will look different. They hope that live bullets somehow changes everything. But here's the thing about hope when it's pitted against tape. Eventually, the tape talks louder than the contract. Eventually, the evidence becomes too overwhelming to ignore. And I think we're getting real close to that point right now in Cleveland. I'd actually argue we might already be past it. I'd argue that the decision has already been made on the field. It's just a matter of time before it's made official on paper. The difficulty here is that organizations have never made this particular kind of move before with this much money at stake. They've benched guys before. They've moved on from guys before. But they've rarely done it when the financial commitment is this severe. They've rarely done it when the contract restructuring that got you into this situation is this complicated. That's why this matters beyond just football. This is about organizational courage. This is about whether a front office is willing to make a decision that's right based on performance, even when the financial implications are uncomfortable. There's also the question of what this signals to other players and other parts of the organization. If you're out there and you see a franchise quarterback with an enormous contract getting benched for a day 3 draft pick, what does that tell you about the organization? What does that tell you about priorities? What does that tell you about the willingness to eat a mistake and move forward? That's a message. That's a signal about organizational values. On the flip side, if the organization keeps insisting that Watson is the guy despite overwhelming evidence that Shedeur is playing better, what does that signal? What does that tell players about whether performance actually matters or whether financial commitment trumps everything else? What does that tell the locker room about organizational priorities? That's also a message. That's also a signal, but it's a very different one. The contract situation is what makes this so fascinating from a front office perspective. Because normally when you've got a performance-based decision like this, you just make it. You look at the film, you make the call, you move on. But when there's this much money involved, When there's this much organizational pride on the line, when there's this much potential embarrassment about having made such a large investment in the wrong guy, then it becomes something else. It becomes a test of organizational character. It becomes a test of whether this front office is willing to prioritize winning over saving face. And that's why I think Thursday's situation, that's why I think the coming days and weeks are going to matter so much for Cleveland. Because they're going to have to decide whether they're going to let performance determine playing time or whether they're going to let the contract determine it. They're going to have to decide whether this is an organization that admits when it's made a mistake or whether it's an organization that doubles down on those mistakes to avoid the embarrassment of admitting them. They're going to have to decide what actually matters when you get down to brass tacks. And those kinds of decisions define franchises for years to come. Here's what's interesting about all of this, because a decision like this, a decision to commit to one quarterback over another, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It creates ripple effects throughout the entire organization that matter just as much as the quarterback decision itself. It affects how coaches operate. It affects how they install things. It affects how they allocate resources. It affects how players prepare. It affects how a locker room functions. It's not just about one guy getting reps instead of another guy. It's about the entire infrastructure of how a team operates. If Shedeur wins this job, and I'm not saying if at this point, I'm saying when, that changes how the entire coaching staff has to operate for the rest of camp and into the regular season. Todd Monken has to start tailoring his install packages specifically around what Shedeur does well. That rhythm and timing game he talked about in his interview. The quick access throws where he can get the ball out fast and let playmakers work after the catch. The intermediate stuff where he's proven he can go through progressions cleanly and hit receivers in stride. That's a specific skill set. That's a specific style of offense. If you're still splitting reps evenly between two quarterbacks with completely different skill sets this deep into camp, you're not maximizing either guy's preparation time. You're not giving either one of them the preparation they need to walk into week one with total command. At some point, and I'd argue that point is basically right now, you have to commit the majority of your install to the guy who's clearly playing the best football. You have to make sure he walks into week one with total command of the offense, instead of still sharing reps with a competition that doesn't look all that competitive anymore. That commitment changes how you structure practice. It changes how you allocate coaching time. It changes how you script your periods. It changes how you approach red zone work and 2-minute drills. If you're the offensive coordinator, you're now designing all of this with one specific quarterback in mind. You're building it around what he does well. You're building it around his strengths. That's a very different approach than trying to support two different guys with completely different styles. And then there's the defensive side of the equation, because when you commit to a starting quarterback, your defense has to adjust. Your defensive coordinator has to script different looks. Your defense has to practice against the specific things that starting quarterback is going to do. If you're committing to Shedeur, your defense needs to know they're going to see a lot of quick decision-making. They're going to see a lot of rhythm-based football. They're going to see a quarterback who's efficient with his decision-making. That's a very different preparation than preparing for a quarterback who might hold the ball longer or take more chances downfield. Now, there's the locker room piece, which might matter even more than the coaching staff stuff. Because Shedeur himself told us in that interview that the quarterback room has grown the most out of anywhere on this roster this year. No petty battles, no beef, everybody aligned. That's a great quote, and I believe him. But I also think that kind of chemistry has a shelf life if the competition keeps getting talked about as open when everybody in the building can clearly see it isn't. Players talk. Locker rooms have eyes and ears everywhere. If Shedeur is out here posting 0 turnover days on a blistered throwing hand running with the twos, and Watson is racking up his 9th interception in 12 practices running with the ones, that gap does not stay a secret inside that building no matter how professional everybody is being about it publicly. Guys are talking in the locker room. Guys are talking on social media. Guys are talking to their teammates and friends in other organizations. That information is percolating through the entire team. At a certain point, continuing to call this an open competition stops protecting team chemistry and starts undermining it. It stops being about process and starting to become about denial. Because it signals to the locker room that performance isn't actually what's deciding playing time. It signals that other factors, money, draft position, organizational investment, might matter more than actually executing at a high level. And that's poison. That's the kind of message that eats at a team from the inside out. That's the kind of message that makes guys wonder if they should even bother giving maximum effort because it might not matter anyway. That's the kind of message that undermines the entire foundation of trust that a coach is trying to build. Organizations that want to maintain healthy locker rooms have to make decisions. They have to commit. They have to send clear signals about what matters and what doesn't. Passes from him. It changes how you evaluate those players. It changes how they're ranked going into the draft. Denzel Boston, who's already flashing chemistry with Shedeur based on what we saw today, becomes a name you want on your radar in middle to late rounds. Especially in any format that rewards yards after catch, because Shedeur has shown he trusts guys over the middle in structure. He's not just heaving it downfield and letting them figure it out. He's placing the ball where they can make plays. Isaiah Bond's speed becomes a lot more relevant in an offense that's actually operating efficiently instead of turning the ball over every 5 minutes and killing its own drives. Efficient offenses run more plays per game. More plays means more opportunities for receivers to get touches and produce. And don't sleep on Harold Landry Jr. at tight end either. A rookie or young quarterback who talks about rhythm and timing the way Shedeur does typically leans on his tight end as a security blanket underneath, especially early in the season while he's still building full command of the playbook. That's a role that creates production. That's a role that translates to fantasy points. Quinson Judkins out of the backfield also becomes more valuable in the passing game if Shedeur keeps taking care of the football the way he has been. Because efficient offenses that don't turn it over tend to have more opportunities to distribute the ball around to multiple weapons. I want to put this whole situation in a little bit of historical perspective here, because Browns fans specifically have earned the right to be skeptical about anything involving that quarterback position. This franchise has a history. This franchise has a story. And that story involves more quarterback carousel rotations than almost any other team in the NFL. Over the last 2 decades, the Browns have cycled through more starting quarterbacks than you can count on both hands. You've got guys who showed promise early then faded. You've got guys who were supposed to be franchise-altering acquisitions who didn't work out. You've got draft picks who busted. You've got trades that didn't pan out. Every single time there's been some version of this exact conversation that we're having right now. Is the new guy really better? Or is it just a hot streak in shorts and helmets that won't translate to the regular season? Is this finally going to be different? Or is this just another false hope before the cycle continues? I get the skepticism from Cleveland fans. I really do. They've been burned before. They've seen this movie play out in ways that didn't end well. They've gotten excited about quarterbacks before and watched those quarterbacks fall apart once they faced real competition in the regular season. That skepticism is earned. It's justified. It's a reasonable position to have given the organization's history. But here's the thing. What makes this situation feel different to me is the sheer consistency of the gap between what Shedeur is doing and what Watson is doing. This isn't one good practice. This isn't a fluke day where things just happen to break right. This is 12 straight days, according to everything we've tracked of one quarterback taking care of the football and playing efficient, rhythm-based football, while the other one keeps turning it over at a rate that would get most backups cut in a real regular season. Think about that. If Deshaun Watson was a backup somewhere, if he wasn't a franchise quarterback with a massive contract, would he still be on the roster throwing his 9th interception in 12 days? No, he'd be cut. He'd be told thanks for your time, but we're moving on. That's what happens to quarterbacks who turn the ball over at that rate. They don't get sustained opportunities. They don't keep getting chances to fix it. But Watson is the investment. Watson is the guy they restructured the salary cap around. So instead of cut or benched, he stays in the game. He keeps getting reps. He keeps getting chances. And Shedeur keeps looking like the better quarterback. That's not a hot streak. That's not variance. That's a pattern. And patterns over 12 days of padded and unpadded practice start to look a whole lot more like real information than randomness. When you're seeing the same evidence day after day after day, when you're seeing consistency in the performance gap, when you're seeing it continue even when one guy is playing injured, that's information. That's telling you something meaningful about the relative ability levels of these guys. I do want to be fair to the other side of this for a second too, because that's what separates this analysis from a lot of the other reaction content out there. We don't just hype one side and ignore the counterargument. It is entirely possible that Todd Monken and this coaching staff are looking at things we simply can't see from the outside. Maybe Watson is doing everything right in the install, hitting every check exactly the way it's drawn up. And the interceptions we're seeing are more about receivers not being where they're supposed to be or defensive backs jumping routes, because they already know the play from a scripted period. Coaches watch tape at a level of detail that guys like me breaking this down from the outside simply don't have access to. They're looking at film angles we don't see. They're evaluating things we can't evaluate. They might be seeing progress in things that don't show up in the stat sheet. That's a completely fair point, and I'm not going to pretend I have some secret pipeline into Kevin Stefanski's mind that tells me exactly how he's grading this competition. But even accounting for all of that, from a pure objective observer standpoint watching these practices, Shedeur has been the more consistent, more disciplined, more efficient quarterback of the group, and it has not been particularly close over these 12 days. That's not me being a homer. That's not me being biased toward the younger guy. That's just what the evidence shows. The difference between this situation and past Browns quarterback situations is that the current situation has actual evidence behind it. It has consistency. It has a track record that's only getting more evident with each passing day. Previous situations might have had hype and hope, but they didn't have the kind of sustained evidence that Shedeur is providing right now. They didn't have the kind of clear comparative advantage that Shedeur is showing against the guy who's supposed to be ahead of him. That doesn't guarantee anything. That doesn't mean Shedeur is definitely going to be great in the regular season. That doesn't mean this won't turn into another false hope situation. But it does mean this is different. This is built on something more than hope. This is built on evidence. This is built on consistency. And that's more than Cleveland fans have had to work with for a long time. So here's where all of this leaves us as we head into Saturday's game against the Bears. A guy running with the backups, playing hurt, posts a perfect stat line. 0 touchdowns, but more importantly, 0 interceptions. Completely clean execution. The guy running with the starters throws his 9th pick in 12 days and gets stripped on top of it. 3 separate media voices independently all arrive at the same conclusion within the same week. Off the field, the guy everybody's rallying behind is showing exactly the kind of discipline and command you want out of a franchise quarterback. When you zoom out to the money, the roster fit, the locker room chemistry, and the organizational direction, every single thread of this story points in the exact same direction. And I don't think that's a coincidence anymore. I think that's a decision that's already been made on the field. It's just a matter of time before it's made official on paper. This Saturday against the Bears is going to tell us a lot more, because live reps against another team hit different than another script against your own defense. I'll be watching who gets the start and how many series each guy gets. We'll break down every single snap the moment that game is over. Is this competition already over in your eyes? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you'll get a response. Subscribe for Saturday's breakdown, because if what we saw today carries over into live snaps, this might not even make it to week 1.